Welcome to Science Corner. I am here with Belinda Tan. Belinda is the physician scientist and co-founder and co-CEO of People Science, a public benefit corporation advancing evidence generation in consumer health. Previously, she co-founded Science 37, a pioneer in decentralized clinical trials, and helped launch the telemedicine platform Direct Derm. Board certified in dermatology and dermatopathology, she is driven by the conviction that consumer empowerment is the essential catalyst for transformative change. Belinda, thank you so much for joining Science Corner.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. Looking forward to this conversation.
So me too. And I'm very excited about this because I'm a scientist, you're a scientist. We get to talk about science. We are on Science Corner, and we are actually going to talk about how science is done in the real world in the supplement space. So as we just mentioned, you are the co-CEO of People Science. People Science is a CRO, but before we move forward, can you help us understand what is a CRO and what does it do?
That's a great question, Jordan. A CRO, it stands for Contract Research Organization. And what CROs are service providers in the ecosystem of dietary supplements and really any kind of industry that needs to find out whether or not things work in human beings. So what we do is we get hired by brands, ingredient suppliers to test their products in people to determine what was the effect. Is it safe? Is it showing what I want it to show? So that's what a CRO does. We're oftentimes behind the scenes when it comes to consumers. Consumers don't really know who we are. However, what is changing, and we'll talk about this later on, is that consumers are now becoming closer and building connections with the CROs, where we're finding having, as you announced in my introduction, having consumers get more engaged in participation is where the data and the empowerment really happens.
I see. I think this is interesting because I see a lot of consumers, they talk about like, I want clinically validated supplements. They're looking for research that shows that their products work. You kind of see this from a 10,000-foot view across a lot of brands in the space. So what is your overall view of like the current state of scientific evidence when it comes to the supplement industry today?
When it comes to the supplement industry, I would say there are three themes that come to my mind, three words. It's trust, data, and artificial intelligence, AI.
Okay.
And how does that all come together? I think a big argument that many people have about a tremendous need and a gap that we need to fill in the supplement industry is to build more trust in the evidence. So how do you know when you're the consumer going to the market, buying the product, the supplement, that what it says is really what it does? And the reason for that uncertainty is because this industry is regulated in a very different way than, say, under other industries like drug development. And so building trust is really critical and necessary. Then comes data. We're at this new era where data is everywhere. I've got an Oura ring. At one point, I was wearing 5 different devices on my body because I was participating in a clinical research study. We've got our smartphones. Data is coming out of us everywhere, and there's so much opportunity to pull this all together to bring it to meaningful information. And then lastly, artificial intelligence. We all see how rapidly this is growing and changing and how it's settling into our lives and how we're implementing this tool. And it's tremendously powerful in terms of putting this all together, in terms of bringing the data, defining the knowledge and the evidence, and I think importantly, helping to build trust. What I'm seeing AI is doing now, especially with, and Jordan, you might know this term better than I, but in the former world of SEO, search engine optimization, now AI is coming into the picture, where if you don't have high quality, credible data behind what you're talking about, the AI is going to pull that up, and consumers have the ability to get closer to understanding, can I trust this or not? So I think we're at a really, really important part of our evolution with where we can figure out clinically with strong evidence and science, what works in the supplement industry.
See, I love it. And I love that you brought up this concept of data like a lot here, because as you and I both know as scientists, data can be interpreted and construed and projected in many, many different ways. And so brands come to you, they say, hey, I want this claim validated. Oftentimes they're thinking marketing, you're thinking science. How do you bridge this gap between helping a brand understand how to properly test a claim that they ultimately want to use in marketing? Because I think all of that is data. It's just a matter of how we tell that story.
It's so true. One of the lessons I learned coming out of the lab as a scientist is it's all about the storytelling with the data, and how you interpret the data. And it's the same thing here. And I do honor that a lot of these brands who come to us as a CRO seeking our support and help and services, they need to sell their products. They need to market it. And so, of course, they're coming to us with ideas of what the claims need to be based on what their marketing teams have said. And where we come in and try to bridge that is, we think in a science forward sort of way, and we need to build studies that are scientifically rigorous. They make sense, and at the same time, they can honor the end goals of the brands to actually be able to sell, what they want to sell with the appropriate scientific questions and hypotheses. So I think there's a lot of relationship building. When brands come to us as a CRO, we need to understand how much support and understanding they have of the regulatory environment. Do they have a legal regulatory compliance LRC group, who's kind of battling it out with marketing to figure out, where can we do the best science possible? And we step in as the scientists to say, okay, here's how you use science to elevate, the truth, and to elevate what you can actually look for in terms of outcomes in the consumer population.
Got it. And you said something there, I think that's really important. You mentioned the term regulatory. I hear people say all the time, supplements are not regulated. Supplements are not regulated. It's not a regulated space. And sometimes it may not feel that way, but it really is, whether or not it's formally enforced or however it's done. Like we are in a regulated space. And so there are a lot of things that you need to consider on that front when your brands need to do when you're thinking about studies. How does this play into your process when you're helping a brand develop or design a study?
It is critical, and it very much plays into our process. I think that a lesson that I've learned coming from healthcare and patient care, working in hospital systems, to drug development, regulatory agencies, globally, and now to the dietary supplement space, what we need to always honor is that there's a marketplace of people that are transacting and receiving services, and we need to honor what those laws and regulations are. So when it comes to how we support our clients, we want to make sure that what data they get out from the work that we do with them can be usable, for their business. I think that's a key part of it. And so when it comes to regulations, we say, okay, in the context of claim substantiation, in the world of dietary supplements, where the FTC, the NAD, the FDA have some role in the oversight of that, we need to make sure that these claims are compliant and how we're designing the studies, the actual protocol titles themselves. I'm getting into the weeds here, Jordan, maybe we'll talk a bit more, but the details of the actual protocol. What am I actually going to measure in this consumer participant, Belinda, and this consumer participant, Jordan, at the end of the day that actually is meaningful, and they can then say, I'm going to put this on my package. My LRC group is good with that. My marketing group is good with that. I think one other thing to mention too about regulations is with shifts of administration, especially in this country, there are also shifts, and some of these happen more gradually and some more quickly, in how this industry will be regulated. Right now, for example, this week, there's a meeting with the FDA Office of Dietary Supplement Program, and they are going to actually contemplate and invite the public to speak up about what's happening in the dietary supplement world. And I think that's really important. So keeping an eye on where the regulatory culture is shifting, and also always keeping in mind that we need to support these businesses so that they can actually do science that they can use. That's the mindset that we have when we are supporting our clients.
Yep. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I like the nod to the fact that we do have administrative changes, we have governmental changes, and it's good, bad, otherwise. It's a matter of just keeping up with how things are adjusting, so that way brands can trust the outcomes that you guys are able to provide them, or the studies that you're developing at the end of the day.
Right.
So I want to talk about, you mentioned a little bit about like understanding what to measure, what to study, things like that. We see a lot of supplement trials, and we see a lot of users at Supco as well who are my supplements working for me? One of the questions I hear all the time, are they working for me? And that comes in a lot of different ways. You have subjective biomarkers. Do I feel more energy? Do I feel like I've slept better? And then you have the wearable data that you mentioned. How do you balance these two very different types of data when you're developing your trials?
It's a very important conversation we have with the sponsor. And in the world of being a service provider of research, we call our clients who pay for the research study, the sponsors. So that's
Sponsors.
the technical terminology. So we have that very open dialogue with the sponsor, to say, what do you want to get out of this? What is your end goal? Is it claim substantiation? Do you want to publish it like an academic research paper? Is it going to remain internal for you to then continue to understand pathways of mechanisms, and how it actually works in humans? So we need to understand it at that level. And I think a big part about designing these studies is we need to think about feasibility in terms of budget and time. So coming back to the reality of these are businesses, they have products that they really believe in and stand behind, and they need consumers to also trust these products and to buy them. So we need to also figure out, what is feasible in terms of the type of scientific question you want to ask. For example, if you want to do a sleep study, and you want to say improve sleep. Well, there's so much more you can unpack from that, right? You can't just say improve sleep, done, design the study, go. You need to say, well, is it improving sleep latency? And that's a very specific component of sleep, which is it helps me to fall asleep faster. And a lot of people find subjectively that's more important to them than sleeping 8, 10, whatever hours. Or do you feel fresh in the morning? And that's another type of very specific outcome that starts to unpack, improve sleep health. So these are the types of conversations that we have with our sponsors to understand, how can we really design a study that targets exactly an outcome that's measurable and that you can actually see an effect and thus use that data.
Got it. So I love that. So there's so many different outcomes that you can measure, right? But it takes a long time to get there. And so when a sponsor comes to you, sponsor being the brand or the supplement company that wants you to test a product for them, there are so many things to think about. We see the terms placebo control, we see randomization, we see dosing, we see the length of time. Where do you even begin? You have all these things. Every trial is different. There's so much to think about. When a brand comes to you, where do you start?
Yeah. That is a great question. And one thing I'll say is we've built a platform that allows a lot of customization. So we really have to have these very clear conversations with the sponsors very early in our process. And the way that we start is thinking about all the terms that you mentioned. All of these are parts of adding rigor, to a clinical research study so that you can remove bias as much as possible, so that you can actually say this data is credible, it's not due to placebo effect, and all the variations of what might actually happen in a scientific study that isn't well designed. So for example, if we're looking at something like sleep and mood, where one would argue when consumers go to the store and they look at a product, what are they looking for? It's a subjective outcome. Mood is measured subjectively. I feel better, and sleep. I feel better in the morning. I feel refreshed. I fell asleep faster. However, what we also find is if a sponsor wants to publish in a certain type of journal, so there's a next level of where many of our sponsors like to go because it adds even more credibility to the research, which is being published in a peer-reviewed manuscript. And when you want to go to that level of being published in a peer-reviewed manuscript, it's oftentimes really powerful to have both a subjective and objective measure. So let's come back to sleep. So if we're looking at sleep and we want to say improve sleep health, we could say, okay, let's just say a more specific endpoint to study there is it improved your sleep latency. And you can say, okay, I actually fell asleep faster. What would be very compelling to be published in a peer-reviewed manuscript is if there's also a wearable, data. So the objective data to show to those who start to get very technical and mechanistic in sleep, oh, I actually see that Belinda's perception that she, slept better is matched up with something else that's not her perception. It's an objective measure. So it actually shows that her duration of sleep is better and longer, or that her duration of deep sleep, which is another measure of a certain type of quality of sleep, is longer. So we try to put all of these together, and I think the main decision-making point becomes, what's the feasibility, what's the budget, what's the timeline? I think in all research that I've done, from medicine to drug development to supplements, speed is critical. People really want to get the results fast to advance their product into the marketplace. So that becomes a pretty key variable in the conversations of what's feasible and what's not, and how do we plan a study that is the best for this particular sponsor's needs.
Yep, and that makes sense. And speed, absolutely, without a doubt, is critical. One of the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear you say speed is recruitment. So it's one thing to say we're going to run this big, beautiful study and collect all this data. It's an entirely different thing to get the people in there to actually, one, adhere to the trial, but just be a part of it in general. How do you all help or maximize recruitment so that way these studies can move at the speed these brands hope they can?
Recruitment is probably one of the holy grails, components of clinical research studies. And if you can think about how studies were done in the past where we didn't have all the technologies and it was not fully virtualized, or at least partially virtualized, it was really hard to get people to drive, 30 minutes, hours, or however long to a site at some regular interval in order to fill out a form and say how they felt. And dropout was high. Not a lot of people can do that in a busy day if they have families, jobs, etc. So one thing that has really expanded both the speed and the diversity of people who can participate in research is virtualizing the studies. And we also call this decentralized trials or remote trials. And what this does is it leverages our smartphones to collect data from participants in their homes. And this has transformed so much of how we conduct clinical research studies across all kinds of industries. And recruitment, in addition to being faster and more diverse, you actually have the capability with the technology tools to get high quality participants. So I think recruitment is key. However, there's another layer to it where when you talk to scientists, you're like, well, okay, you may have recruited a lot of people very quickly, but what is the completion rate, which we call compliance? Did Jordan finish all 10 surveys that he had to fill out over the course of the month, or did he just fill out 2? So what's your compliance, and what is the overall data quality in terms of missing data, all of the details that when it comes to the very end of the study and the data scientists and biostatisticians start analyzing it, like this is actually good quality data. So these are all the things we think about with recruitment. It's quality, it's compliance, and the speed for sure with this decentralized model has really transformed how we think about that tricky part of research.
Yeah, I love it. And as someone who used to run these kinds of trials and in person settings and understand how hard it is to get people, even in small numbers, to join them, I think being able to recruit large numbers of people and run studies quickly is a really, really huge accomplishment. So something I am personally interested in is, we see a lot of multi-ingredient formulations and single ingredient formulations in the market. They probably need to be tested in different ways. It's one thing to say, okay, I have a magnesium glycinate, I'm going to test it for sleep. And then an entirely different process to say, I have this sleep blend and I'm going to test that. How do you think about testing these multi-ingredient products when it comes to claims versus, and understanding what's happening versus these single?
It's, to me, this moment of where technology, again, can transform how we think about science. So back in the day when we didn't have the technology that we did, it was really hard to think about how to get to the degree of personalization when you're looking at, like, how does this work in Jordan versus how does it work in Belinda? So when we're thinking about these finished products, whether or not it's a single ingredient or multi-ingredient, I think ultimately we want to know, does this work in me, as a consumer? Does it work in you? And having this type of end product, finished product validation is where we're headed in this industry. And I think that's tremendously exciting. And it's because we have these tools that let us do faster, high quality, less costly studies at scale. So we can do much more research to figure this out. And I think one thing that's also very exciting in terms of how we study how these works in individuals is that the tools allow us to look at each person's N of 1 journey. Perhaps you've heard or shared with the audience N of 1. So, my journey taking that magnesium supplement over the last 3 months is different than your journey because you have other supplements in your stack. Your lifestyle is different. Your diet is different. And maybe you start and stop it in a different sort of protocol. And these are all very, very important and real world in terms of how people actually use a supplement, which ultimately lands on how does it work for me? Because it's going to work differently for you. So I think where we are today is we have the tools and the capability to collect that type of data for customer validation. And what excites me even more is that brands and ingredient suppliers are interested in doing this kind of research, because doing just that one randomized controlled trial that every 5 years isn't going to cut it anymore. Because what are consumers looking for? It's what we're talking about here. Like, we need more evidence.
Yeah, and I love this. So I think about N=1 all the time, and we have 700,000 users on Supco. They're all talking. They all share like their individual experiences with different supplements, and so it's a really. I think this is a really big topic right now in our space. And so, but from a trial perspective, that can be very tricky. So when you are thinking about like replicating real world N=1 use versus a very tightly controlled, placebo-controlled study where you are looking at a specific subset of a population, how do you find this balance when you're starting this, like you're trying to be controlled and run a good trial, but you also want real world applicability? How do you meld those two worlds together?
What I'm hearing here, Jordan, is some education to the audience about real world versus controlled, and how we've traditionally done clinical trials in the broader world of drug development and even like research in academia. It's very controlled, meaning that you make sure all the variables and biases are, the variables are set so that biases are minimized, and you can actually say, okay, this is the one mechanism, the causality, the inference that this caused this, I can stand behind that. That's credible. However, the problem with that, as you know, as a scientist, is it's not generalizable. So oftentimes, these findings are high statistical significance, between these two, placebo and treatment group, the effect is quite large. Then you go out in the real world, people start taking it, and it's like, it's all over the place. And that's partly why we see when drugs get marketed, and it's millions of people are now using it versus the thousands in the clinical trials, all of the side effects start emerging. So I think where we are today with N=1 is that because of the tooling, we're able to follow people in their journey. And I think where the challenges are is you need to make sure that your platforms allow, the platforms, I mean like the software, allow for high engagement of the participants in the research, so that they're continuing to contribute the data over the long-term journey of their health and their supplement use. And that's that N=1. And also it can capture the data of the crossover effect, which in the world of research, that's also another. Decades ago, people talked about N=1, and it wasn't possible because we didn't have the tech, but today it is. And to think about the possibility that you can actually have more highly powered studies, meaning fewer people participating in a study when you have cohorts of N=1, because the control is yourself. Like Belinda has been taking this supplement for 6 months. She's been able to stick to the protocol of crossovers where I stopped it, I started it. There's an understanding of when it washed out, so that's not having an effect. There's an understanding of when it ramps up, so I know when the effects start. So all of that over time, you can imagine the power of how that allows for both personalization and understanding the biology of what's happening. And I think alongside all of this is also understanding the demographics of participants in studies. What's the age? Are these women who are going through the significant hormonal shifts of their life, from adolescence to middle age to menopause? Are these people who have other types of non-communicable chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, all of these? And pulling that in, I think, is where the power of the data, the artificial intelligence, and the trust can be built.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's beautifully said. And so theoretically, let's hope a lot of brands are watching this and they're seeing the great work people scientists are doing. What are the most common mistakes that you see companies or brands make when they're designing or wanting to run clinical trials when they come to you?
This is also a common mistake of scientists, by the way, which is they want to do everything. And I mean, I do too. I want to ask all the questions. Oh my gosh, can we do like these 5 other endpoints? What about adding in? I mean, it's so exciting. I think that is what speaks to how inherently all of us, we all have a scientist in us. And this is something that Carl Sagan had said, decades ago. Every one of us as a child is born as a natural scientist. So wanting to ask all the questions. And I think where the rubber hits the road is like, well, we need to do this within time and within budget. So like, how do we narrow it? How do we focus it? How do we choose the endpoint that makes the most sense for your marketing, your legal, regulatory compliance, teams? And that's oftentimes where the healthy conversation and dynamics happen early on when clients come to us. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to educate this market too, as more and more people come on board to want to do clinical research because it is faster, more affordable, and high quality. I think we're at a really exciting time for this industry.
I love it. And my last question for you before I let you go, Belinda, what is one supplement that you personally cannot live without, and one that you think is flying under the radar that you wish more people knew about?
Oh gosh, I know people always love hearing this. One supplement I cannot live without. I imagine people in the audience might laugh at this. So I have octogenarians who are in my life, and people older, older generation, and bowel movements is like a big topic. And I would say that a supplement that I think is amazing for regularity is flaxseed.
Flaxseed, okay.
It's so simple. Flaxseed meal. It's not a branded ingredient necessarily, although there's probably products out there, but like ground flaxseed meal, a couple tablespoons is amazing, and it's a plant. So I love that.
I'm a chia seed user myself, so I understand the value and the benefit where you're coming from here.
Okay, amazing. And in terms of some supplements flying under the radar, I love tea. I'm from Malaysia. I love like decoctions, and I am really into simple herbs that we grow out in the garden, and you pluck them and you make them into teas. I mean, some of the really great brands out there, like traditional medicinals, I always have a supply of those in my cupboard. But teas are a supplement that really suits my constitution, and my culture, and just something that comes into my body and is warm and really fills me up. I love that. Yeah.
I love it. Belinda Tan, co-CEO of People Science. Thank you so much for joining Science Corner. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jordan. This has been lovely. I really enjoyed this.